Hello, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi, and this week in my Print on China column, I covered the Chinese discourse on a military exercise that is going on between the US and Philippines. So, this is a long standing military exercise that has been going on for a very, very, of course, long time. But of course, apart from the US and Philippines, there are other countries such as Japan, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand who are taking part this year. So Balikatan 2026 is important on a number of counts this year. And in my view, this is just not another military exercise that keeps happening every year. So, of course, as I've said, that in terms of scope, in terms of scale, it is one of the largest in its history. And it is unfolding across some of the most strategically sensitive waters in the Indo Pacific. So when we talk about Balikatan, it means shoulder to shoulder in Tagalog. That's the language of the Philippines. And this year, that shoulder to shoulder alignment is much more visible, much more intentional than ever before. And of course, it is now becoming global. So like minded countries are coming together to advance the integrated defense structure within the Indo Pacific region. So I've already mentioned alongside the US, Philippines, there is Japan, there is Australia, New Zealand, France, Canada. So these countries hold important place this year, primarily because this means that a number of countries, even if they have divergent approaches, divergent views of what and how the Indo-Pacific should look like, that actually means that they have similar concerns and they want to focus on a collective defense. But what really stands out uh, is that how and where they are operating. So in terms of geography, from northern Luzon facing the Taiwan Strait down to Palawan near the contested South China Sea, this is of course a map of overlapping flashpoints. But when we talk about Balikatan, what is the objective? What is the purpose? Of course, China is the unwritten, unsaid uh, reason behind this exercise and of course behind this scale, but of course it hasn't really been explicitly named. The main objective, the stated objectives is of course that they are there to deal with the real world issues, and of course China is something that is very much visible there. And of course, if you look at Beijing's reaction and the discourse that is happening in China, it leaves little room for doubt or uncertainty that China isn't really behind the scale and the intensity, the scope of the exercise. So the Chinese official response to this is that they have won the drills, that the countries that are part of the drills are playing with fire, they are escalatory, destabilizing. It shows the so-called Cold War mentality, the same standard language that has been used for a number of things by the Chinese side. And across Chinese media and online commentary, Balikatan is being framed as part of broader strategy of encirclement, containment, and what the Chinese discourse narrative is on Balikatan is that it is an increasingly coordinated effort to push back against China's maritime reach. So now coming to how China is actually interpreting this. So the first factor here is that geography is strategy for the participant countries. So number of Chinese analysts are zeroing in on locations like Batanes, just that is just 200 kilometers from Taiwan, and of course Palawan that is near the Spratly Islands. So, in Chinese view, this isn't just regular maritime exercise that happens every year. The location tells them that they are doing it at critical maritime corridors that are actually gateways between the South China Sea and the wider Pacific region. So, from Beijing's perspective, operating here looks very much deliberate. It raises concerns about potential control over choke points that could shape access, mobility, and influence in an event of a crisis. Then the second factor here is about Japan. So if you look at it, not just in Balikatan, Japan is actually playing a very proactive role in terms of how its military role is going to be defined in the wider Indo-Pacific region, and it's kind of stepping up as well. So Japan's role and the historical wartime memories and narratives are absolutely under the spotlight in Chinese discussion and discourse. Japan's expanding security presence in the region, it does carry both strategic as well as historical weight in Chinese discourse. And there is a scholar, prominent scholar, Shani from Fudan University. He argued that very recently Japanese naval vessel transited through the Taiwan Strait that took place on April 17. So this date holds a historical significance for China-Japan relations in terms of that it is actually the anniversary of the Treaty of Shimonoseki when Qing China ceded Taiwan to Japan. So in his perspective, timing really mattered, and that was just to kind of provoke China and to remind China again of the history and how Japan Taiwan was ceded to Japan. And actions are something, Japan's action are something that are being interpreted as something that is more political and more historical in nature. So it's more about signaling than actually actions for Chinese discourse. Now, coming to the third factor, from Chinese perspective and in Chinese narrative, these exercises and the wider collective actions are looking as network partnership, that there is an attempt for a tightening of network among allied countries or among like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific. So, what does this mean? With more countries joining exercises like Balikatan, Chinese observers increasingly see a US led interconnected security architecture actually taking shape. There has been a lot of discussion about US being overstretched, US not paying attention to the region, but now I don't think it's just about the US. There are a number of countries that are also stepping up, that are also showing their presence in the Indo-Pacific region, trying to deal with threats and concerns from their own perspective. So this interconnected network security architecture is something from Chinese perspective that extends across the Indo-Pacific and is designed in their way to constrain China's behavior, China's assertive postures. Then at the same time, China is making its own message very, very clear. It's also expanding its naval presence, and its naval activity is actually becoming much more visible, more frequent, and more sophisticated than ever before. And in this context, a military commentator Song Chongping, he described that the Type 055 destroyer, it is a central node in an integrated combat system which is built for both carrier strike groups and independent operations. And this is something that in Chinese discourse is very much visible, that China is actually showing off Type 055 destroyer in the waters of the Indo-Pacific. And specifically, the news have been surfaced in March as well as in April, which is very much near the Balikatan exercise. And then there is another military analyst, Chang Chun She. He points to the recent drills as evidence, the Balikatan drills as evidence of growing multi-domain capability, coordinated operations across air, sea, and subsurface domains that could be sustained over long distances. So the recent movements from countries other than China, countries such as China, from naval transits near the Ryukyu Islands to amphibious sea trials in the South China Sea, uh, these are not really anymore considered as routine exercises, as something that is routine. Why? Because of the timing, of course, and because of the intensity and because of the frequency. So these developments point to something that is bigger than the routine exercises. So the Chinese discourse points towards the fact that across the Indo-Pacific, military activity is becoming continuous, connected, and increasingly deliberate. And of course, when it comes to exercises like Balikatan, and at the same time, China's, what I could call China's parallel naval operations, are part of wider shift towards a more networked, more competitive security environment. So now Indo-Pacific is actually transforming into a region where signaling is becoming much more prominent, where geography is now taking a more prominent shape, and where presence of the Chinese naval forces, of the naval forces of the like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific are much more visible, and their activities are becoming much more coordinated. This is something that is very much visible within the Chinese discourse. So while there's still debate about whether the US, because of the Middle East war, because of the problems in Europe is going to be present in the Indo-Pacific or not. But I think, according to the wider, broader Chinese discourse, one thing is very, very clear, that the Indo-Pacific, the trajectory is that the security cooperation is actually accelerating despite the discussions about the decline of the US interest and tension in the Indo-Pacific. And in fact, the integrated defense is becoming denser, it's becoming more multinational and becoming more operationally integrated. And to conclude, I would say that raises a harder question, that how close it is to operating on the edge of it. And is it going to lead to an escalation? Is it going to lead to a miscalculation? But I think, in my point of view, one thing is very much clear, that there is going to be contestation in the Indo Pacific region, and the next flashpoint is going to take place within the region. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.